My name is Karen Rosenberg, and I am thrilled to be talking about this topic today because it's one that I have gotten more strategies to handle over the course of my career. So, we're talking about dissertation comeback. And the way I think about that is I think about anytime we're doing extended, sustained work, whether that's working on a dissertation, a master's thesis, revising your dissertation into a monograph, a book, a series of publishable articles. The nature of having a life and not being not being sort of in your kindergarten through high school arena, that phase of life, is that you have other things going on. And so what that means is that for many of us, we will have to navigate this kind of start and stop rhythm with our academic work. For some of us, myself included, the getting started again can be a real barrier and a real hindrance. I'm going to talk about some ways to work with those barriers and hindrances and hopefully to shift them into strategies and opportunities. My own journey is that during the course of doing my dissertation research, I did research on violence against women and specifically related to intimate partner violence and the legal system. During the course of my research, I had a lot of significant life events. I got married, which was a pretty easy, joyful one to navigate because I just had some time to take off for some celebrations and then some recovering from the celebrations. But if anything, after that, I felt sort of more energized and excited to continue with my work. I then got pregnant and had my first child, and I was very fearful that I wasn't going to get back to the dissertation. I had decided by that point that I probably was not going, that I was less interested in pursuing a traditional tenure track academic career afterwards. So, and I'll get into this in a moment, but so my purpose was getting a little fuzzy in terms of what the end goal was in a very practical way, not in terms of what drew me to the work and my passion for the work, but in terms of just the practical, like how was I gonna, what job was I gonna get? How was I going to put food on the table? Those kinds of things. I also, I was, I think like many new parents, I was completely overwhelmed and I wasn't sleeping and I didn't have access to the cognitive capacities that I had relied on and taken for granted. So I was able to kind of push through, and what ended up getting me through was that I did some discernment work, decided that I was going to go back to a previous love of mine, which was writing center work. So supporting other writers in the academic writing process. And I got a job, which was very lucky and very amazing. And a requirement of it was that I finish my dissertation within the first 3 months. So then it was panic mode, got it done, but it wasn't fun. So since then, I've had the real blessing of being able to support hundreds of students in reaching their academic goals while having full lives, while balancing full lives, and along with all of the unexpected joys and difficulties that full lives entail. So now I'm going to just share my slide deck and talk through some more specifics. Okay. So can Kirsty or someone, can you let me know? Can you see my slides? Can you see a slide?
Yes, we can see
Okay,
your
great.
slides. Perfect.
Perfect. So what we're going to talk about today is how looking back, so seeing where we have been, will help us move forward with our academic work. So there's some kind of pre-work. This is not if you have left your work for a few days or a week, but maybe you have taken the summer off, or maybe it's been a little longer than that. Then there's some pre-work that I recommend engaging in. We'll talk about that. Specific strategies for returning to academic work after time away. Um, how to do it. Like, what are some techniques, some things that are backed by research that are going to not only help you make progress, but also be sustainable over the long term. We all have our what we can often term academic time traps. There's some that are common to many of us, and I'll be talking about those today. And you also may have your own sort of ways you end up derailing yourself. So we'll talk about ways of avoiding or managing, dealing with some of those academic time traps. And finally, we'll talk about techniques for increasing focus and motivation. And one thing that I want to say is that this is likely for anyone who's watching this video, it's very likely that this is not your first time returning to work, right? So what I hope for today's talk is that you are doing some of that self-reflection and inventory of what's worked in the past and jotting down notes. You're welcome, of course, to take notes from the slides and from what I say. But the truth is, if I can help you connect with your own internal resources and remind you about what's worked for you in the past, I will be extremely happy because you are your own best teacher. Unfortunately, we also can be our own harshest critics. So we're going to talk about that. But just these are some things that I have identified as being common amongst many of us as we engage in returning to our academic work. And yes, pay attention to, oh, right, I remember when I worked first thing in the morning before I had to get the kids, even if I just put in a half hour, that really helped. You might be a night person, so that might not be your strategy, but any strategies that you remember and that you feel a little buoyant, a little lighter when you think about it, jot those down. Okay. All right, so before we can come back, we need to understand where we've been with compassion and clarity. One thing I'm going to be coming back to a lot today is this idea of self-compassion and being kinder to ourselves. So often, I know for myself, I was a very good student, like, in grade school, in high school, and I was very used to that, like what comes next, not what I've done. And if I didn't meet the expectation I had set for myself, then I was looking at, how could I improve? How could I do better? And then when I translated that into my graduate school work, where I was working on projects for a very long time, and I felt like I wasn't living up to a standard. Of course, it's harder in graduate school because you don't, when you're doing your own research, there's a lot of ambiguity built into the process, and the reward systems are much different. But I would just, instead of celebrating what I had done or having some compassion for what I hadn't yet done, I was not kind to myself. So this is something that can sound, it can sound kind of fluffy in a way, but my argument is that you will be more efficient if you can be kinder to yourself and have compassion for where you've been. So my example, I was very mad at myself when I remember I had a few times when my son he was an infant and I had a babysitter come over for a few hours and I sat down, I had done my research already. So I was analyzing data and then writing it up. I remember that I felt mad at myself for all of the things that I wasn't doing. And I also have these sense memories of sitting at the keyboard with my fingers over the key, with my fingers, and then just sort of spacing out and half falling asleep. And instead of being like, wow, you know what? You're really tired. That's really hard to, be up all night with an infant and have my body be recovering and expect to be able to turn on my academic brain on demand. I was mad at myself. So then that led to more like a kind of unhelpful spiral. Instead, if I could have brought some more compassion and been like, and as I said previously, like, this is really hard. And then also looking clearly, like maybe this plan of writing, maybe other people can write with a 1 month old, but this doesn't seem to be in the cards for me. So let me just kindly re-examine my current plan. So for me, what if I had taken this advice, what it would have probably looked like is stop beating myself up because I don't have the circumstances, or I didn't have the circumstances when my son was an infant to really get back to the work. Okay, then revisiting purpose. So in what we sometimes call the messy middle of a big academic project, it can be easy to lose track of our purpose. And that makes it harder to find the through line to make it through. So the first thing is to think about what drew you to this work in the first place, and to see if there's any energy or passion there that you can link to. So I was able to do that, and but I did it. It was at times it was what was a little hard, and then my why shifted over time. So when I was pretty idealistic when I started, so it was really about some ways that I wanted to see society change and some intellectual questions that were really inspiring to me. That was the purpose that drew me in the first place. To finish, I still, was able to contact that to some degree, but my purpose was to keep a job I loved. And so it may be that you have a combination of purposes that are both intellectual and practical. If you have a lot of trouble identifying your purpose, that I think is a good clue to do some deeper self-reflection work, to make sure that you're on the path that, with the questions and your field that make the most sense for who you are now. Okay, so what are some strategies for returning to academic work after time away? The first one is deceptively simple, but it's really just looking at what you have. What do you have done? I know I was just, several of my clients have talked about not remembering things that they had written a month, a year, 2 years ago. So it's compiling all of the information that you have already done and just reading through it and seeing like, okay, now what do I have? This just is like a little tip. This can be a pretty neutral process. It can also be a process that can kind of kick up some of our anxieties, because we may either feel that we're at the bottom of the mountain and we have so much distance that we still need to cover, or if it was stressful doing the work in the first place, some of those feelings of stress may come back up. So all of which is to say, be gentle with yourself, but start by figuring out at a granular level, what work do you already have? Oftentimes, especially if the break from our work has been long, has been on the longer side, we may not, the our academic community may not be fully aware of where we are, the reasons, if that makes sense to share, for the break from the academic work or our plans for returning. So I termed this communicate strategically. So that might be, do you need to touch base with your advisor or supervisor? Do you need to talk with members of your committee? If you have been out for a long time and you're not sure if you are still in good standing with your program, there may be someone in, like, a program assistant, or someone in the registrar's office that you need to get some information from. The other thing that may have happened when you took your time away is that, more scholarship may have come out, or you may have some questions about how you're proceeding with your academic work. And so that can be another reason to, request a meeting with your advisor or someone on your committee, or with colleagues of yours or other people in the field. Oftentimes, a big block for returning to the work comes down to not knowing precisely the direction we're going in. There becomes a time, I was going to say there becomes a time in graduate school, but the truth is, for many of us, from the first day of graduate school and continuing on into post-doctoral work, it can feel vulnerable and not that safe to say, I'm not sure I know what I'm doing, or I don't know exactly where I'm going. And mentors may say, consider these three literatures, or make sure you're using, the appropriate methodologies. And we may feel like it's on us to understand what they mean, but then when we get to our desk, we find that we're experiencing some writer's block. Sometimes that gets to, we don't know exactly what's expected of us and where we're going. So wherever possible, we want to make sure that we're really crystal clear on what our next steps are with our work. Many of you may have heard about the growth versus fixed mindset. So a fixed mindset is how we are, and our capabilities are something we're born with. We have or we don't have. I'm a creative person. I'm really bad with numbers. I'm gifted in sports. So it's not just, the fixed mindset is not just around like limitations. It can also be about strengths. But what makes something a fixed mindset is it's something that is as it is and cannot be changed. There's been a lot of research done that is not a useful mindset for getting any kind of high level work done. Instead, we look at what a growth mindset is. And so instead of, I just can't do numbers, I'm really horrible at math, it's, I can't do this quantitative analysis yet. You put the yet on it because it's just, you haven't yet been able to do whatever it is you set your mind to do, which opens up a whole new set of opportunities for getting support, for learning, and for moving forward toward your goals. So check your mindset. Do you believe that you can get the support that you need in order to learn what you need to learn to finish? And the answer is you absolutely can. This next one is kind of funny, right? Lower your expectations. We often come back to our work expecting, like myself, like as a new mom, kind of staring at my fingers, not being able to write anything at all. I was expecting to like jump right back into chapter 4 and just, pick up where I left off. That's not, I mean, if that's how it works for you, that's fantastic. For many of us, if it's not working like that, it can be really helpful to lower our expectations for what we expect of ourselves, especially as we're ramping back up into our work. Lowering expectations can also help us sidestep some of the perfectionism that could be like, oh my goodness, these sentences just don't hang together. Be like, okay, well, my expectation maybe is just I'm gonna try to get a paragraph drafted today, and it doesn't have to be great. And then that might sound like a very modest goal, but if you're sitting down, if you're doing your work, if you're putting one proverbial foot in front of the other, you're making progress. And then the final thing is to go in with a plan. So after you've taken inventory and you have some, there's never going to be perfect clarity in graduate school or beyond because you are literally constructing new knowledge and there's a lot of inherent ambiguity in that. But within that, as long as you then take what you have and make a plan, you're going to be in much better shape than just sort of swimming around after you've done your inventory without an intentional kind of superstructure to what you're doing. Okay. So I'm going to start with the juggling multiple responsibilities part of this slide, and then we'll go to the make real progress. It amazes me when I think back to myself or when I talk with my clients and I say, what else is going on in your life right now? And they sometimes will talk very modestly, but like for 10 minutes about what is, who they're responsible for in their lives. So that's everything from elders, children, pets, community members, faith communities. And in addition to like physical care of other people, they also may be working multiple jobs. They may be working either as as a solo instructor teaching courses or as a TA. They usually have to work at keeping a house running and taking, eating and meal planning, all those things. So let's get very granular with what else you are juggling and being real about how much time and brain space those commitments take. If you are in a place where you are trying to accomplish a goal, and whether that's finishing your dissertation, if you are faculty member and you're needing to work on your publications and you're giving yourself a deadline or you have an externally imposed deadline, see what you can abandon or pause. So this may be you can, if there's any volunteer commitments that you can pause, it may be, is there anything that can you live with a house that's a little less clean? Can you eat leftovers more often? Like what can you make easier in the other parts of your life? Many of us go to graduate school and stay in academia because it is such an exciting kind of intellectual space, and there's so many opportunities that come our way. And I've definitely learned so much from being asked to be, on panels or contributing to papers that were outside of my dissertation research or teaching. So I'm not saying that you should cut out all of the non-essentials in your academic program, but at least consider saying no strategically to some of them so that you have the time and space to get your central work done, whether that's dissertation, a book, your manuscripts. And then finally, to do a support audit. So I've talked about all of basically the time taken up by the multiple responsibilities that you may be juggling, but also who's around to help you, whether that's family members, whether that's colleagues or classmates where you can do some sort of, I'll read your drafts. If you read mine, I'll give you, like let's meet and be accountability buddies, whatever that looks like. What kind of support can you draw on? And I suggest writing that down as well so that you can make sure that you're mobilizing all of it. One thing that we can talk about in the Q&A section is, specifically the dissertation coach exists to be part of your team, to be a support for you to be able to reach these goals in a more efficient and hopefully more enjoyable way. Okay. So here again, I want to just signal as you're listening to me make these points, any things that come up for you of like, oh my gosh, this worked really well for me in the past. I forgot about, I really need to jog first thing in the morning. And then I'm really, it just really helps me have a more positive mindset. So just wanted to signal again that let my words spark your own insights. Okay, so these are some tried and true ways to make real progress. Break the work down into smaller tasks. So you have a plan, you are clear on what you need to do, and then you don't want to have on your work plan, finish chapter 1. That is vague. It sounds big and scary, even if it's not. You'd want to break it down into a smaller task. So that might be, if it's the beginning of it, say, do an outline for the first section of chapter 1. Reread work that I already have done on chapter 1. It may be like, make a note of what I will need to review after I've written everything else. The second thing is to protect time. With so many things we schedule our meetings on our schedule, on our calendars. We have, if we're still teaching or taking classes, those get scheduled on our calendar. We need to make concrete, specific times that we protect for our work. And ideally, those go on your calendar. And if you're working at home, all the folks at home know to, when those are going to be and that they should try to leave, not get you unless they really need to. And then, you'll do your work and you'll have your plan and you'll have broken it down into smaller tasks during that protected time. Okay. Best laid plans go awry. So the act of planning and breaking down our tasks and bringing our best foot forward with our very best mindset, things go off the rails. Sometimes that can be an internal thing, like whether we're physically ill or we're having a mental health challenge. Sometimes that can be external. If someone that you are responsible in terms of in a caregiving role has an emergency, your protected time, it may go out the window. So that's okay. This is you go back and you do these steps again and again. And so anticipate that you may get thrown off track. And then what are your personalized set of practices to get you back to your desk? And again, I very, very strongly believe, and this also is all of us at the Dissertation Coach believe, that this is not work that is meant to be done in a vacuum. You, just as you provide vital support to those in your networks and your communities, you can rely on people in your networks and communities to really help you stay on task, keep a sense of humor, stay focused on the work, deal with all of the life things that happen, expected, unexpected. And so to really pay attention to strengthening your support network as one of the key components of making real progress. Okay, academic time traps. So these are things that can sometimes they masquerade as doing lots of work, and masquerade is actually kind of judgmental. So I want to restate that and say they can feel like real work, and they often can be very helpful, but they're different than making real progress on your key project. So we'll like for like a dissertation or a paper, a manuscript, you're getting ready for publication. They can be a lot of the work adjacent things. So the first, and I don't want to be that repetitive, but it is one of the main takeaways is making sure that you're working with a plan. Um, the second one, there is a book I love that came out a few decades ago by a sociologist named Howard Becker. That's called Writing for Social Scientists. And one of the chapters is called Terrorized by the Literature. So that's the idea that you need to have read everything, have understood how all of the scholarship in your field fits together, what the key debates are, to a very, very minute level. Of course, we all need to have expertise in our field, but it is unrealistic and impossible to say that we're going to know everything about what's going on in our field. So this can manifest itself as I will get to my draft after I have read more articles. Now this, you need discernment here, right? Because there are times where you do need to do that. And comps or comprehensive exams are a great opportunity to really become well-versed in your field and to have protected time to do some really deep reading and reflection and synthesis work. There's something different between, okay, I do actually need to learn about this facet of my field, and oh my goodness, they're going to discover that I am not really an academic, I'm an imposter, so let me just read 10 more articles. The second one has an emotional valence of being terrorized by the literature, which ultimately is, do we have confidence in ourselves? Related to the next one of I need to have this, I need to know everything about my field. I need to know everything about how to write a manuscript before I do it. So we learn by doing. And that does open us up for feedback to say, you know what? Really strong here. It's, here's where you still need to work to get this to the final stage, right? Whether that's an editor or someone on our committee. But it's through the act of getting our drafts done, sharing them with people, that we then improve, not by learning everything first and then trying to write this perfect stuff, which gets to the next point of there often, for many of us, not all of us, but for many of us, it can be very, very helpful to be able to get our ideas down in a way that is not publishable quality, that is rough, that may have grammatical errors, that may not use the evidence in the most sophisticated way. But you're not only through this process learning to write, you're also writing to learn. And so you want to go through that process and learn through that and not try to make the text and formatting super polished too early in the process, because it just takes a lot of time that then if your question shifts or you decide you need to, some of the data is pointing you in a different direction, you've spent all this time on these gorgeous, perfectly formatted pages that aren't going to go into your final document. The last one ties to what I talked about previously. Oh, no, the working with too much ambiguity. So just one of the hallmarks of doing academic research is that we are learning about things and putting information together and making discoveries that have not happened before. And that's exciting. It can be scary. And there is this process that we have to go through where we are operating within a field of uncertainty. That's really important. On the other hand, too much ambiguity, not understanding what your audience, so whether that's your committee or editors or co-authors, what they're looking for, not understanding their expectations, that's a kind of ambiguity that's not that's much less useful. And so it's good to instead of saying, well, I should know it, I'm going to move forward in many, many ways, trying to kind of figure out what, my committee wants or what the journal is expecting. You want to narrow down you want to get clarity where clarity is available. The final academic time trap is I referred to earlier as well. And that's really talking about like, what else, are you one of those people that says yes automatically when a neat opportunity comes your way, or where you want to make someone else's life easier? So many of us in academia feel perpetually like we have too much on our plates. And so it can be a really generous instinct to say, oh, yes, let me help you with that. I would love to do a guest lecture. I would love to take on, another TA responsibility. I'd love to be an editor on this journal. So I'm sorry. Okay. So it's not saying that you should not commit to other academic, tasks that are adjacent to completing your manuscript, but just see how they relate to your goals, your values, your purpose before you commit to them. And keeping alert to see if they're like, oh, if I do all these things, they're very rewarding in some ways, and I don't have to face maybe some of the ambiguity or some of the negative self-talk that seems to get kicked up when I work on my manuscript. All right. Increasing focus and concentration. And then this is my last slide. No, I have one more slide after this, just to give a sense of time. We'll then have time for Q&A. This one is so hard, isn't it? I think about like with my kids and they're in high school and all of the things that are trying to take their focus and attention away. And so part of it, I think it's just realizing that for all of us, this is something that we're going to have to continually and kindly pay attention to. How can we increase our focus and concentration? So 4 things that have been really beneficial for my clients, for me. The first is environmental alignment, which is really just a fancy way of saying, what does your workspace look like? Are you working in a space that is conducive to you increasing to being as focused and on task as possible. So some people, it doesn't bother them to have, piles of papers and, you know, kids' toys around or dirty dishes. Like none of that interferes. Great. Other people, it's harder for them to focus if there is a lot of physical clutter on their desk, or if um, we have different needs for natural light. I need a lot of natural light in order to really feel like I'm waking up in the morning and really bringing my sharpest self to tasks. So how can we set up our environment? And then a corollary to this is give yourself permission to take work time to set up your space in a way that supports you. Okay. This, of course, a huge part of this is our digital lives. So clients have had so much success with different app blockers or phone blockers, or putting the phone in a different room, or setting a schedule of when they can check social media and making it difficult to go to some of those websites or those apps that seem to, it's not an academic time trap necessarily, but those time traps. And then where you kind of like come to and you're like, wow, a half hour has passed. I have no idea where it went. So taking some of your work time to set up your space in a way that's going to support you. How are you feeling? So a lot of there's like this the iceberg, right? It's like how we're doing that we present to the outside world, and then how we're doing internally. And so we all have different ways of bringing and keeping our nervous system in a kind of happily chugging along place. When I say nervous system regulation, that means ideally when I'm sitting down to do my work, I want to feel focused. I want to feel alert. I want to feel calm. I don't always feel that way. One of the things that I do is I will take time, and I'm going to even do it now, where I put one hand on my chest and one hand on my belly, and I just stop. I call this a micro practice because we don't always have time to do a half hour of yoga, but just a moment. So there's going to be a little silence and you're going to hear me breathe. So I'll close my eyes. And I'll just take a couple of breaths and I'll just check in with myself and say, how am I feeling? And what can I do? Is there anything I can do to bring myself into a state of more focused calm? When I do that right now, I notice a couple things. I notice some tension here, right? So this maybe goes to the environmental alignment. If I were working at my desk, I'd probably have a sit-stand desk, so I'd probably bring it up. I also noticed that I have a little too much energy, like this desire to share everything I know with you in 1 hour. And that's a little bit of this like completeness thing that I talked about before. I can't do that, but I want to. And so I'm like, okay, I can take myself down a notch to be calmer and more present with you. Will you be able to perceive that? I don't know. But it's a way of bringing myself into a greater, more regulated nervous system. What can come up for us during this if we do take a moment and check in, are some things can feel pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And we try to not assign values to things that feel unpleasant, for example, but figure out how we can work with them. Often, when I was doing my dissertation, I would be highly anxious and fearful. Fearful I wouldn't finish, anxious I wouldn't finish. And I was still able to work with it. So it's not like you have to be in a completely calm state in order to get work done, but it's good to have a sense. And then, now when I know more about this, if I find that I'm anxious, I just see, is there anything I can do with changing my posture, breathing, to lower the anxiety. And sometimes I keep working, if I have a deadline, I'll keep working while feeling anxious if I'm able to. Other times I might say, oh, I'm getting that internal signal. I need to pause and do something else. And that's going to help when I sit down, it's going to help me be more focused and concentrate in a more efficient way. Movement and meditation. So this is to rely on practices that you already have, or be open to developing new ones, specifically with a lens toward what helps me stay more focused, what helps me concentrate for greater periods of time. And finally, time blocking. So many of you may have heard of something called the Pomodoro technique, which is basically in that technique, you take a certain amount of time, 25 minutes, and you say, okay, for 25 minutes, I'm going to give it my all, and I'm going to bring my best game forward for focusing and concentrating. At the end of that time, I'm going to take 5 minutes off. I'm going to get up from my workstation. I'm going to do what I need to do to really celebrate the work that I've done, shake it off, and then go into another focused time. So time blocking can be very, very helpful because we can't expect ourselves to be at peak concentration and focus, all day, every day. Okay. This is the last slide. And then I am looking forward to taking questions, hearing your thoughts and comments. I want you to revisit and reflect on your strengths. You have come so far to get where you are today. What have been some of those things that you're really good at, or that really give you a sense of accomplishment, that you've been able to use your superpowers to help others in your community? Reflect on those. Write them down if you don't have them somewhere, if you don't have that written down, and keep them somewhere so that you can really touch back into your strengths, and remind yourself of all of the things that you are already excellent at. The second is to be curious about your academic work processes. The truth is, for better or worse, there's no one way to do academic work that's best. Even if I've been, really emphasizing a point today, it's you, right? Like, so instead of being judgmental toward yourself about what you've done or not done, be curious about it. You'd say, wow, that didn't go as I wanted it to go. What did happen? What can I learn from it? Mobilize your resources. So this again is to the support network, and remembering that you're not in this alone. And finally, no matter how small it might feel to you, track and celebrate your wins. We sometimes talk about this as having a to-do list and a to-do list. So what have you done? If you sat down at your, and opened your document for the first time in 3 months, that's huge. If you have, worked every day for a week, amazing. So make sure that you are celebrating those wins and not just looking at what still needs to be done.